This video is to show you how to apply a terminating pocket. So I've done a separate video on a patch pocket. A patch pocket is a pocket that kind of hovers in the middle of a space and gets top stitched on around its edges. A terminating pocket means that this pocket, one or more edges are going to go into a seam that's later sewn. So this is applying that pocket in a little bit of a different way. So my terminating pocket, especially on the messenger bag, is often a lining pocket. So a lot of people like to put pockets into their lining, much like a purse. So when you slip your hand down into a purse, there's pockets up along those edges. Sometimes it's a big old divider that separates the whole thing. Sometimes it's a small pocket on that lining edge. And so what I've created is a large pocket that is almost as big as the front and back pieces of my lining. So I'm going to grab one of those pieces, which I have here. It doesn't really matter which one. At this point, they're identical. But later, if you decide this is the front versus the back, when you assemble the bag, then you can determine that location. Then I've cut this other piece, and it is almost the same size. So I've used the same pattern piece here. I've just shortened it slightly so that the upper edge stays away from the seam and the seam allowance when I'm assembling my bag later. So I cut it a 1/2 inch shorter than the rest of my bag pieces. And then I pre-finished the edge, which I showed in the patch pocket video, and I show on the edge stitching video as well, rolling that top edge 1/4 inch twice, pressing it, and then edge stitching it. So stitching really close to this folded edge to pre-finish the top of the pocket. So I've already done those steps to make this just a little bit simpler. So now what I'm going to do is lay this up against my bag piece. So this should be fashion side out. So this is the fashion, my fabric is the same front and back, but if you have a distinct pattern or print, you want to make sure that that pattern or print, the fashion or the pretty side, is out on both pieces. So I'm seeing the fashion side here. This would be the wrong side, right, of my pocket piece laying up against that fashion. So both fashion sides are showing. Then I'm going to line up all of my edges and kind of smooth out this piece. Kind of hard to do on this little bitty sewing table, but that's okay. Lay it out on a bigger table. And then I'm going to go ahead and stick a few pins in just to get it in place. I am not sewing a seam here. I am merely going to baste this into place. So you can baste by hand or you can baste by machine. I'm going to show you a machine basting stitch. And this is a temporary stitch that's going to get this piece on here. I can remove my pins and then not worry about it anymore. It will secure it to my other piece so that it's just ready to go when I am ready to assemble everything else. So typically, when you're basting on a machine, you're going to change the stitch length. So your stitch length dial should be that guy right there. So I'm going to turn this up to a large stitch length. So the bigger the number, the larger the stitch. And for a basting stitch, it can go up to a 4 or a 5. So I've changed that stitch length. This is going to make each individual stitch longer. Again, this is not a construction stitch, it's just a get it in place kind of stitch. We often turn up the length on a basting stitch because then if something's wrong or you need to move it, you can easily remove that stitch. It's much easier than a teeny tiny stitch. Also, it'll just go faster, it'll sew faster when it's on a longer stitch. So again, this just gets it in place. So now, let me reposition this a little bit so we can all see. Turn my machine on, and notice how I faced my pins. I did this before when I attached the patch pocket. I faced them all the same direction so that I can pull the head in as I go. So I want to baste shallower than my actual seam allowance. So if my seam allowance is a 1/2 inch, I'm lining this up with my presser foot or my first groove there so that I'm really basting at a 1/4 inch. The other thing about basting is you don't really need to back stitch. So the temporary stitch is just to get it in place. It's not for construction purposes. So I'm going to go ahead and just keep going, no back stitching. Go slower if you have to on the curve. Okay. Careful when you pull on your basting stitch that you don't tug on the actual stitches and give them tension, because then you've created a gathering stitch on accident. But I have basted this whole piece into place. So now 2 things have become 1 thing, and I can just leave this alone until I'm ready to assemble these pieces. But basically the terminating pocket that I created here goes all the way into the side seams, and it also goes down into the bottom seam as well. It could also be a terminating pocket that you would pre-finish the top, and then you would lay it on your piece with folded sides, and the bottom could go into the seam. That also could be appropriate. So it'd be kind of a hybrid between the patch pocket and the terminating pocket. It's really up to you how you do it.